The awakening in chains. The morning was cold, so cold it made her bones hurt. Eliza opened her eyes. She didn't know where she was for a moment. The ceiling above her was made of wood, cracked and black from smoke. It smelled like wet socks, old potatoes, and something worse, something rotten. Her bed was not a real bed, just a rough wooden plank nailed to the wall. No mattress, no pillow, just a thin gray blanket. Her legs ached. Her arms were tied with iron cuffs, connected to a long chain that rattled when she moved. She was in the Hollowfield Workhouse, a place where poor children were sent when they had no one left. She remembered now, 3 days ago, men in black coats had come to her home. They said her father had written dangerous words in a letter. Her father had been a teacher, gentle, kind, always writing in notebooks. They took him away while Eliza screamed and held onto his coat. No one listened. No one helped. She was dragged away, put in a cart with other crying children, and dropped here like a sack of potatoes. Now she was just a number. A voice shouted from outside the sleeping room. "Wake up, you useless rats." Eliza sat up quickly, even though it hurt. Around her, other children, some smaller than her, some much older, sat up too. No one talked. No one dared. The voice belonged to Miss Crowthorne, the head matron. She was a tall, pale woman with sharp eyes and lips that never smiled. She always carried a long stick in her hand, and she used it. The door banged open. "I said, up," she screamed. The children scrambled. Some tripped. Some were too slow and got a whack on the back. Eliza stood, holding her arms close to her chest. The cuffs were heavy, and the chain scratched her wrists. She followed the line of children out the door. They walked into the cold hallway. The stones under their feet were wet. Water dripped from the ceiling. They passed a boy mopping the floor with a rag tied to a stick. He looked no older than 8. They reached the washing room. It was just a metal trough filled with freezing water. No soap, no towels, just cold. Eliza dipped her hands in and gasped. Her fingers felt like they were burning from the cold. "Quiet," Miss Crowthorne snapped. After the wash, they went to the food hall. The food was a dry crust of bread in a cup of gray water. Eliza sat on a wooden bench and looked at the bread. She was so hungry her stomach growled loudly, but when she took a bite, it was so hard it hurt her teeth. Across from her sat a boy with curly hair and sad eyes. He didn't speak, but he nodded at her. She nodded back. That was how people showed kindness here, with small looks, with quiet nods. After breakfast, they were sent to their jobs. Eliza had to pick oakum. That meant pulling old ropes apart with her fingers until they bled. The ropes were wet with salt. The strands cut into her skin. Every child sat on a wooden bench in a row, picking and pulling, hour after hour. The pain in her fingers was terrible, but she didn't cry. She had learned already, crying only made them hit you harder. She worked beside the boy from breakfast. He finally spoke after some time. "My name's Thomas," he whispered. "What's yours?" "Eliza," she whispered back. They didn't speak again for a long time, but that was enough. Now she had a friend. Just one, and that was everything in a place like this. Hours passed. When the bell rang, they were marched back to their room. Their hands and faces were black with dust. Eliza's fingers were raw and red. She couldn't feel her thumb anymore. She climbed back onto her plank and lay down. The cold found its way through her blanket. She looked at the wooden ceiling and thought about her father. Was he alive? Was he thinking of her? She wanted to cry, but she bit her lip. No one heard you cry here, and if they did, they would beat you. So she held her tears and whispered to herself in the dark, "I'll survive. I'll get out. I'll see the sky again." Ashes on her palms, the days blurred together like gray clouds in a stormy sky. Each morning at the Hollowfield Workhouse began the same. A scream, a slap, a cold splash of water, then pain. Eliza had learned the routine. She no longer waited for the warmth. She no longer hoped for kindness. The pain in her fingers was always there now, like little fires burning under her skin. The salt from the old ropes made every tiny cut sting. Her palms were covered in thin scabs and fresh blisters. But today, something felt different. Something was off. She noticed it in the way the older girls walked, slower than usual. In the kitchen, the cook slammed the pot down too hard. And even Miss Crowthorne seemed tense, pacing instead of shouting. Her stick stayed at her side. Whispers floated through the halls. "Another boy died last night." Eliza heard it from a girl who swept the stairs. They just carried him out before sunrise. No one even said his name. Eliza's heart felt heavy. Death had a smell here, cold and sour. You could feel it coming before it arrived. She'd seen children disappear before, and the adults acted like nothing happened, like they were never there. Later that day, while picking oakum, Eliza looked over at Thomas. His hands were shaking. His lips were blue. She leaned in. "You cold?" He nodded. "Didn't sleep." "Rats again." Eliza didn't know what to say. What could she say? There were always rats, always fear, always hunger, but still. She reached into her dress pocket. She had saved a small piece of bread from the day before. It was hard and stale, but it was something. She slipped it into Thomas's lap without a word. He looked at her, just looked. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't let them fall. He nodded once. That was enough. In the afternoon they were moved to the coal room. Their job, scrub the black soot from the workhouse walls. The dust got into their lungs, their eyes, their mouths. Eliza coughed so hard her chest hurt, but it was in that dark, dusty room that something unexpected happened. While scrubbing near the far wall, her brush hit something odd, a soft, hollow thunk. She paused, brushed away more soot, a line, a crack. She leaned in and pushed lightly. A brick shifted, her eyes widened. She glanced around, no one was looking. She pushed harder and the brick popped inward. Behind it, darkness, a hole. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She said nothing, just covered it back up with soot for now. But her heart beat faster, faster than it had since her father was taken. That night, after the chains were locked and the lights were out, she whispered to Thomas, "There's a secret space," she said, behind the coal wall. He lifted his head slowly. "What kind, I don't know, but I want to find out." They made a plan. The next time they were sent to the coal room, they would go back to that wall together. The next day, they were lucky. The group was small, only 5 children, 1 old guard. Miss Crowthorne was nowhere in sight. Eliza and Thomas pretended to scrub, slowly working their way back to the corner. When the others were distracted, she pushed the brick again. This time Thomas helped. What hole opened wide enough for them to crawl through. Inside it was silent, cold, a hidden brick cellar, dark and forgotten. But something amazing lived there. A rosebush, growing right through a crack in the stone floor. Pale green vines curled around, broken bricks, and in the center was a single pink rose, alive. In this place of filth and pain, something beautiful had dared to grow. Eliza knelt in front of it. Tears filled her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Look," she whispered. Thomas stared. "It's real." "Yeah," she said softly. "It's real." They sat there for a moment, just breathing. "This is our place now," Eliza whispered. "Ours only." Thomas smiled, a real smile. His first since arriving at Hollowfield. They named the rose Hope. That night, Eliza had a dream. She saw her father standing in a library, holding a book and smiling. He pointed at the rose and said, "Even in darkness, life reaches for the light." She woke up crying quietly into her blanket. The next few days were harder. The food got worse, the beatings harsher. One girl tried to run. She was caught and never seen again. But Eliza had something now, a secret, a place of color in a world of gray. Every moment she could, she visited the cellar. She cleaned around the rose with an old cloth. She brought bits of water in her palm. She even carved a tiny E+T in the bricks beside it. One day Thomas brought a piece of charcoal. They used it to draw stories on the wall of oceans and stars and fireflies. They pretended they were explorers, dreamers, survivors. They were building something. Inside themselves, outside the workhouse. But darkness always fights back, and it was watching. The secret garden beneath the ash, the coal room, had become more than a punishment. To Eliza and Thomas, it was their sanctuary. A hidden world behind a crumbling wall, a quiet pocket of earth where the workhouse's cruelty couldn't reach, where no one shouted, where no one cried, where the rose still bloomed. They visited it in turns now, slipping through the broken brick when the guards weren't watching. Eliza had stolen a cracked tin cup to water the roots, while Thomas smuggled in scraps of fabric to line the stone floor. Slowly, they transformed the hidden cellar into something beautiful, soft, secret, sacred. There was a strange comfort in the silence there, in a place where children screamed and coughed and were beaten for speaking out of turn. Silence felt like gold. Eliza began to call it the garden one morning. As frost bit at the windows and children shivered through the icy washroom, a stranger walked through the iron gate of Hollowfield Workhouse. He wore a dark brown coat, clean shoes, and a hat that didn't sag like the guards. He didn't shout, he didn't scowl. His eyes were gentle blue like melted ice. He carried a notebook and walked slowly, observing everything. His name was Inspector Bramley. He was from the city, sent by Parliament to check on the workhouses. Miss Crowthorne didn't like him, that much was obvious. Her smile looked like she'd been forced to swallow vinegar when she greeted him. "Inspections are pointless," she muttered to a guard later. "We feed them, we clothe them, what more do they want?" Eliza noticed how the staff cleaned the hallways extra hard that day, how they gave the children slightly bigger pieces of bread, even a spoon of milk. But the inspector still looked concerned. When he passed the oakum room, he paused. His eyes met Eliza's. She quickly looked away that evening. Eliza was called into Miss Crowthorne's office. She had never been there before. Her heart pounded. The office was dark. Walls lined with books that hadn't been touched in years. A cracked oil lamp flickered on the desk. The matron's stick leaned in the corner like a quiet threat. The inspector sat on the other side of the room. He gestured gently. "Sit, please." Eliza hesitated, then obeyed. Miss Crowthorne stood behind her like a shadow. "Your name is Eliza Tallow?" he asked. She nodded. He opened his notebook. "You've only been here 6 weeks." Another nod. "And yet, your name has come up more than once." Eliza froze. "I'm not in trouble, sir," she whispered quickly. I do my work." He gave her a soft smile. "No, you're not. In fact, one of the guards said you're the only one who doesn't complain, not even when your hands bleed." Eliza said nothing. He closed his book. "Do you know what a Parliament inspector does?" "No, sir. I look for things people try to hide." Silence, then, slowly, he added, sometimes even hope. Eliza's lips parted slightly, her hands twitched in her lap. I believe there's more to this place than what's on the surface, he continued, leaning forward. And I think you've seen things. Her heart skipped. Was he talking about the rose, the cellar? But before she could answer, Miss Crowthorne slammed her cane on the floor. She's a child. You're wasting your time. Eliza flinched. The inspector stood. Sometimes, ma'am, children are the only ones brave enough to tell the truth. He walked toward the door, then paused. Thank you, Eliza. We'll speak again. And he left. Miss Crowthorne stared at her for a long moment, then hissed, go now. Eliza ran. That night she found Thomas in the garden. She told him everything. He listened with wide eyes. Do you think he knows? He asked. I don't know, Eliza said. But I think he wants to help. Thomas looked around the little cellar. The rose was blooming a second petal. It was the only color in their gray world. I think we need to trust him, Eliza whispered. They sat in silence. Then Eliza pulled a small scrap of fabric from her pocket. On it, she had drawn a picture with charcoal. It was of the rose, and beside it, a stick figure, boy and girl standing, hand in hand. Donna smiled. They hung it on the wall. Their first piece of art. Their first act of rebellion. Whispers of fire and rebellion. Winter came hard. It slammed into Hollowfield Workhouse like a curse. The stone walls grew colder. The wind howled louder. Ice crept through the cracks in the windows, and the children, already thin, already bruised, began to break. Some caught coughs that never left. Some stopped speaking. Some simply stared at the wall for hours. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself and counted the days. It had been almost 3 months since she found the garden, since she first saw hope. The pink rose blooming in darkness. It was still there, still alive. So was she, but just barely. Miss Crowthorne had grown more cruel. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the visit from Inspector Bramley. Maybe she knew something was slipping out of her control. Whatever it was, her stick fell more often now. Children were beaten for coughing, for dropping bread, for walking too slow, and the food. It was nearly gone. Sometimes they didn't get any at all. One morning, Eliza stood in line and held out her tin plate. The cook scooped only a spoon of watery broth onto it. No bread, salt, just water with floating bits of onion. She didn't complain. She took the plate and sat beside Thomas. He looked worse. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes always tired. Eliza split her spoon with him. He didn't argue. That was the rule now. When one had more, you shared. Even a drop. That night, whispers filled the sleeping room from bunk to bunk. Child to child, a name, a secret, a spark, the little ghost. Someone was helping. Someone was leaving extra crumbs under pillows. Someone put clean rags on raw fingers. Someone dropped matches and twine near the coal room. No one knew who but Eliza did. It was her. She didn't mean to start anything big. It just happened. One night she saw a girl named Ruth crying from a broken toe. Eliza left her a scrap of cloth soaked in cold water to cool the pain. Another night, she gave a crying boy half a crust of bread. She began slipping quietly through the workhouse at night, careful as wind, soft as shadow. Her chain had broken weeks ago, rusted from years of use. She hid it under her blanket and pretended to limp so no one noticed. No one saw her move, but they began to speak of her. A myth, a whisper, the little ghost. Thomas was the only one who knew the truth. You've started something, he whispered one night. It's nothing, Eliza said. It's just crumbs. Thomas shook his head. It's more, and it was. The older boys started passing notes during work. One read, "Together we're stronger." Another said, "Watch the rose." No one explained it, but it spread. Eliza carved a symbol on the back of her work stool, a small rose, just that. The next day, she saw it scratched onto the stair rail, then on a bedpost, then on the coal shovel. The rose was growing, but fire and flowers don't mix, and Miss Crowthorne was watching. One afternoon, during a rare moment of silence, she dragged a boy named Daniel into the hall. He had drawn a rose on his arm with ash. She made the children watch as she beat him. "Let this be a warning," she shouted. "No more secrets, no more lies." Eliza bit her tongue so hard it bled. She felt Thomas trembled beside her when it was over. The children returned to work in silence. But Eliza wasn't afraid. She was angry that night. She found a package under her blanket, wrapped in paper, tied with string. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a map, and a letter. The handwriting, that was clean and bold. "Eliza, there is a door beneath the pantry floor. The key is hidden in the stone lion's mouth outside the chapel. Use it when the time is right." Her heart stopped. It was from Inspector Bramley. He knew about the garden, about her. He wanted her to escape, not just her, them. The next day, the snow began to fall, heavy, thick, silent, like a blanket over the world. Eliza went to the garden cellar and sat with Thomas. She told him everything. He listened without blinking. Then he looked at the rose, now holding 4 petals. "It's almost ready," he whispered. She nodded. "So are we. But freedom never comes easy." That same night, Miss Crowthorne found the cellar. She stormed into the coal room with 2 guards and tore down the loose bricks. Eliza heard her scream. "Who built this filth?" They dragged Eliza out of the line. And this time, there was no saving herself. Miss Crowthorne raised her stick. "So this is your secret garden, girl?" Eliza didn't speak. The guards held her arms. Miss Crowthorne swung, and the world went black. The night of the shattered lock pane, that's what Eliza felt first. Hot and sharp, running down her back where the stick had landed again and again. She lay curled on the cold floor of her bunk. Her arms wrapped around herself. Her thin nightdress was torn, her skin raw and bleeding. The other children had watched her punishment in silence. No one had dared to move. Miss Crowthorne had ordered her locked in the sleeping quarters with no food. The door was bolted from the outside, but she hadn't taken one thing: Eliza's spirit. When the dark came and the wind moaned against the stone walls, Thomas crawled beside her. He had tears in his eyes. "They can't do this," he whispered. "They already did," she muttered through cracked lips. He held her hand. "We have to leave, before they kill someone else." Eliza didn't answer at first. Then she sat up, slowly. Her eyes, red and swollen, burned not from tears but from rage. "I have the key," she said. Thomas stared. What? She pulled the paper-wrapped letter from inside her blanket. It had been hidden in a tear along the seam. She had read it 100 times. "The lion's mouth outside the chapel," she said. "Tomorrow morning we get it. Then we go, but what about the others?" Eliza looked around the sleeping room. So many small faces, so many hollow eyes. Children who had forgotten what sunlight felt like. She looked back at Thomas. "We take them to..." The plan was simple and impossible. They would break into the chapel during morning chores, distract the guard, get the key, unlock the pantry floor, and escape through the hidden door Bramley had marked on the map. All while hiding bruises and avoiding Miss Crowthorne's ever-watchful eyes. Still, Eliza had done harder things. She had survived. The next day, the air was sharp with frost. A pale sun hung low in the sky, weak and distant. Miss Crowthorne was strangely calm. She watched the children from the stairs like a spider on its web. Eliza limped through her chores, face blank, shoulders down, playing weak, hiding strength. At noon, when the older boys were sent to carry crates to the chapel storeroom, Eliza nudged Thomas. He slipped behind the group. Inside the chapel, the air was colder. The stone floor echoed with footsteps. There it was, the statue, a lion carved from marble, chipped at the edges, its mouth open in a silent growl. Thomas reached up with shaking fingers and felt inside. Nothing, then something. Then something metal. He pulled it out. A small, rusted key. He slipped it into his pocket and walked out without a word. No one noticed. Not yet. That night, the snow returned. It came down fast and heavy, covering the world in silence. Inside the workhouse, the children lay awake. Eliza sat up. She had told them quietly, one by one, not all of them, only the ones who could run, the ones who would not cry out. Tonight was the night. They crept into the pantry. It was dark. The smell of dried beans and old onions filled the air. Thomas pulled back the rug and found the small iron latch. He fit the key. Click. The trapdoor groaned open. Below was a narrow passage, low and wet, the smell of earth and rats and cold stones. Eliza went first. Thomas behind her, then the others, 12 in all. Small feet, quick breaths, silent prayers. They crawled through the dark for what felt like forever. The tunnel twisted and narrowed. Some cried quietly. Eliza whispered to them, "Almost there. We're together. We're alive." Finally they reached the wooden door at the end, just as Bramley had drawn, but it was locked, not with a key, with a heavy metal bar. They pushed. It didn't move. Eliza clenched her fists. "No," she whispered. She threw her shoulder against it. Nothing. She looked around. The tunnel was shaking. Snow melting above, seeping through. Time was running out. Then Thomas stepped forward. He picked up a rock, swung it hard once, twice. The lock cracked. On the third hit, it snapped. The bar dropped. The door flew open. Cold air rushed in. Real air, freedom. But behind them, a voice screamed, "They're gone." Lights flashed behind. Footsteps. Guards. Dogs. Eliza didn't wait. She grabbed Thomas's hand. "Run." They burst into the snow-covered woods. Branches tore their clothes. Ice cut their skin. But they didn't stop. The children ran like shadows. Through the trees. They didn't know where they were going, only what they were. Leaving behind. Chains. Silence. Fear. Miss Crowthorne stood at the workhouse gate, her eyes wild. She had lost them, and the world would soon know, because, in the snow, nailed to the gate was a paper, a rose drawn in black ink, and one word beneath it: hope. The trial of the ashes. The snow had stopped by morning, but the world wasn't quiet anymore. By dawn, the forest echoed with the sound of hooves, lanterns swinging, and voices shouting into the trees. The children, cold and shaking, had made it to the edge of the village, hiding in the woods near the river. Eliza stood beside a frozen log, her arms around a little girl who couldn't stop coughing. Thomas crouched nearby, watching the road. His hands were bleeding from the run, but he said nothing. They were all alive, but for how long? They couldn't hide forever. By midday, the villagers had heard everything. 12 children, barefoot, bruised, half-starved, found crying behind the stone fence near the old chapel, wrapped in stolen workhouse rags. No adult in sight. One of them had fainted. The town doctor was called, then the mayor. Then finally Inspector Bramley. He arrived on horseback, mud on his coat, fear in his eyes. He pushed through the circle of townsfolk and knelt in front of Eliza. She was too tired to speak, but when she saw him she cried for the first time in weeks, not from pain, but because someone had come back. Someone had remembered her. The children were taken to the village hall and given blankets, warm broth, quiet beds. For most it was the first kind touch in years. Eliza was given a clean nightdress and wrapped in soft quilts. Her back still burned with bruises, but her heart felt light, almost floating. Bramley sat beside her and gently touched her hand. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "We did. But the work wasn't finished." 2 days later, a carriage from the Crown Court arrived in the village. A hearing was to be held in the church, an official inquiry, they called it. But for Eliza and the others, it was a trial. The first time the truth would be heard, the first time the world might finally listen. Miss Crowthorne was brought in, flanked by 2 officers. She wore black from head to toe and held her head high, acted like she was still in charge, still powerful, but her eyes flicked with worry. When she saw the crowd, the church was full. Villagers, lawyers, journalists, even the mayor's wife, and at the front, sitting beside Bramley, Eliza Tallow, the judge banged his gavel. The inquiry began. Bramley took the stand. First he spoke of the rotting food, the blood-stained floors, the whippings. He showed the bruises on Thomas's hands. He read a letter aloud. She had written it from her bed the day after their escape. "No one heard us cry, but we kept living. We kept hoping, because even a rose can bloom in darkness." Gasps filled the room. Miss Crowthorne's face turned to stone. Then it was Eliza's turn. She walked slowly to the front. Her steps were unsure, but her voice clear. She stood behind the wooden rail and looked straight ahead. "I was 9 when they brought me to Hollowfield," she said. "They told me my father was a traitor. They never told me why. They locked me in a room, beat me when I cried, starved me when I asked for help." The room was silent. Eliza held up her hand. The scars from the ropes were still there. "They made me tear ropes until my fingers bled. And when I found a flower growing in the dark, they tried to kill me for it." A woman in the front row sobbed. Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't stop. "I helped 12 children escape. I would have taken more, but some were too sick, some were too afraid." She turned to face Miss Crowthorne, and some didn't live long enough. Miss Crowthorne looked away. Shame had finally touched her after Eliza spoke. The judge asked if anyone else had something to say. A man in a ragged coat stood in the back. His voice shook. "I was a worker at Hollowfield 20 years ago," he said. "I saw what they did. I tried to tell someone. No one believed me, but I kept the records. I kept everything." He handed the court a folder inside. Names, punishment logs, secret letters, and proof. Pages and pages of proof. The court whispered, then the gavel banged once more. The judge stood and said the words Eliza had waited her whole life to hear. "The Hollowfield Workhouse is hereby closed. Miss Agatha Crowthorne is to be arrested and tried for cruelty, neglect, and endangerment of children." Outside, the sky broke open. Not with rain but sunlight, golden and soft. Eliza stepped out onto the church steps and closed her eyes. The warmth on her skin was like a promise. For the first time, she believed she might grow up. That evening she visited the ruins. The workhouse had been emptied, the gate sealed, but she knew the way to the garden. She slipped through a side path and found a broken wall. And there it was, the rose, still blooming, still reaching toward the light. She knelt, touched its stem gently and placed a note at its roots. "We lived. We survived. We are free." Then she stood and walked into the light. Her name in stone years had passed since the gates of Hollowfield, slammed shut forever. Where once there was pain and chains and crying in the dark, now there stood a garden. The stone walls had been torn down, the cold iron bars melted and turned into fences with open gates, and the soot-blackened windows that once watched children suffer were replaced by clean glass that let the sunlight in. They called it the Hollowfield School for Orphaned Children. It had classrooms, warm blankets, real meals, and laughter. There were no punishments, no chains. And at its very center, where the coal room once stood, was a greenhouse filled with flowers. In the middle of that greenhouse was a rose, a soft pink one, still blooming, still alive. Eliza walked through the front doors of the school, her heels clicking softly on the polished wooden floor. She no longer wore torn dresses and shackles. She wore a soft blue coat and a red scarf. Her hair was longer now, tied back neatly, but her eyes were the same. Calm, fierce, remembering the children who passed her in the hallway smiled and waved. Some even whispered, "That's her," because they knew. She wasn't just a teacher, she was a legend. Eliza stepped into her classroom and looked at the row of desks. Small hands held pencils, faces bright and eager. "All right," she said, gently. "Today we write letters. Not to anyone else, just to yourself. Write about your biggest dream." A little boy raised his hand. "What if we don't know our dream yet?" Eliza smiled. "Then write about the day you'll find it." And the room fell into the quiet hum of children writing, a sound more powerful than any scream. Later that evening, Elisa walked the garden path behind the school. The stone steps led down to a familiar place, older now but untouched by time. She passed the old cellar door, still framed by bricks. Inside, the garden still remained. No longer a secret, it was now a room where children came to sit, to cry, to dream. And on the back wall, beside the rosebush, were carvings, hundreds of them, names of children who had passed through the school. Each one etched their name like Eliza once did, a mark of survival at the very top. Surrounded by a rose and two small stars was the first name, Eliza Tallow. Every year, the town held a remembrance day, not to mourn, but to honor. People from across the country came, those who had once been orphans, workers, children, locked away in places like Hollowfield. They lit candles and told stories of survival. This year, a new statue was being revealed in the school courtyard. The mayor stood on the stage, holding a white cloth. He turned to the crowd. "This statue is not of a queen or warrior," he said. "It is of a child who spoke the truth when others were silent, who showed us that even in the deepest dark, something beautiful can bloom." He pulled the cloth away. Gasps filled the air. It was a statue of a young girl in a thin dress, her arms slightly raised, holding a rose in one hand. Her eyes looked toward the sky at the base. The words were carved in soft gold. Eliza Tallow. She planted hope where only ashes lived. Among the crowd stood a man with graying hair and a scarf. He had a soft stutter when he spoke and walked with a slight limp. He held a piece of old wood in his hands, with E+T carved into it. Eliza turned and smiled. "Thomas," she whispered. They hugged, no words needed. Together they stood beneath the statue. Two souls who had once lived in chains, now free, standing tall beneath their own sky. That night, after the crowd had left and the lights had dimmed, Eliza sat beside the rosebush in the greenhouse. She placed her hand on the soil and closed her eyes. She saw her father's face. She saw the coal room. She saw 12 children running through snow. And she heard it again, that whisper, that tiny, powerful whisper from long ago. "If I survive today, maybe the sun will come tomorrow." And now she knew. The sun had come, and it would shine forever. Voices from the rows. The Hollowfield school was quiet under the autumn sky. Orange leaves drifted across the playground. The children had gone inside for the day. Inside the greenhouse, the air was still warm. Sunlight filtered through glass, touching the soft petals of the pink rose, the same one Eliza had saved long ago. It was taller now, stronger, its roots deep, its stem wrapped around the brick wall like a memory, refusing to be forgotten. And beneath it sat a girl. Her name was Amira. She was 8 years old, small, curious, and full of questions. She had only been at the school for 3 months. Her parents had died in a fire, and she'd been passed from place to place until she ended up here. She didn't speak much, not yet, but today, she held a notebook in her lap and a pencil in her hand. She looked at the rose, then at the wall, then at the stone under it, the one with Eliza's name, and finally, she wrote, "Dear Miss Eliza, I don't know you, but they say you lived here before me. They say you were brave. They say you helped children like me run away from bad places. I don't feel brave. I miss my mom every night. I cry under my blanket so no one hears. But sometimes, I come here and talk to the rose, and I feel like you're listening, so thank you for being real, for being the first one who said, 'Enough, love.'" Amira. Eliza stood quietly in the doorway of the greenhouse. She hadn't meant to spy. She had come to water the rose, like she did every evening. But when she saw Amira sitting there, so still and thoughtful, she had paused, and now her eyes filled with tears, because it wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to all of them now, to every child who had been silenced, to every whisper that had grown into a voice. That evening, Eliza called a special assembly. All the children sat on cushions in the main hall. The fire crackled softly. The air smelled of warm bread. Eliza stepped onto the small wooden stage, holding an old box in her hands. "I want to share something with you," she said. She opened the box slowly. Inside were the things she had carried since she was a child: a piece of old rope, a scrap of her first blanket, a pin she had once used to carve her name, a charcoal drawing of the rose, now faded, and Thomas's scarf. She held them up one by one. "These are not just objects," she said softly. "These are memories, proof that pain can turn into power, that silence can become song." She looked out at the room. "And now, I want you to make your own box." The children blinked in surprise. "I want you to fill it with things that matter, things that remind you who you are, what you've survived, what you're still becoming." A hand went up. It was Amira. "What if we're still scared?" Eliza smiled. "Then you're still growing. And that's the bravest thing of all." Weeks passed. Each child made a memory box. They filled them with letters, drawings, pieces of old clothes, pebbles from the garden, and pages from books they loved. Some included photos of people they had lost. Some included keys they no longer needed. They called it the Hope Box Project on soon. Other schools began to copy it. Hollowfield became more than a place. It became a message, a whisper that became a roar. 10 years later, Eliza sat beneath the rosebush again. She was older now. Her hair had gray at the edges. Her hands had softened. She didn't teach every day anymore, but every evening she came here to sit, to remember, to listen. One day a boy brought her a book. He was new. "Nervous, I found this in the library," he said. Is it true? He handed her a copy of a book titled The Girl in Chains, Her Story, written by a former journalist who had once attended the trial. She opened it, saw her name, and nodded. Double quotes. Yes, she whispered. But it's not just about me. She closed the book and handed it back. It's about every child who lived through something and dared to say, I deserve more. Before he left, the boy turned and asked, do you think the rose will still be here in 100 years? Eliza looked at the flower still blooming and smiled. If one child believes in it, she said, it always will. The world had changed, but not everywhere. Far beyond Hollowfield, in a neighboring city called Greystone, there stood another building, not quite a workhouse, but a correctional school with the same cold bricks and locked doors. The faces inside were younger, the punishments quieter, but the suffering, it was still there. And yet, something new had arrived. A letter taped to the inside of the courtyard gate. No name, just a drawing. A rose hand dash sketched in black ink, with a simple phrase beneath it, even in the dark, something beautiful can bloom. The guards ripped it down, but the children had already seen it, and the whisper began again. Among those children was Isaac, age 11. He had been taken from his mother during a street sweep, falsely accused of stealing bread. The city didn't to have orphanages anymore, just places that looked nicer than they were. Isaac had been silent since arriving, but the rose, it stirred something. That night he sketched it again on the wall beside his bed. He copied the quote carefully, and as days passed, he noticed others doing it too. Quiet drawings hidden on shoes, under plates, behind doors. One night, a girl named Noura tapped his shoulder. Do you know what the rose means? He shrugged. No, but I feel it. She smiled. It came from a school far away. A girl named Eliza started it. She escaped a place like this. She made something new, something safe. Isaac sat up. Did she really? Yes, and now we carry it. They called themselves light carriers. No one led them, no one told them what to do, but they began to share, to care. If one child had bread, it was split. If one had a bruise, it was cleaned with torn cloth. If one cried, another sat beside them. In silence, and always, the rose was drawn nearby. Back at Hollowfield, Eliza sat in the office, now filled with thank you letters from children around the country. She received a letter marked Greystone, urgent. Inside, a photo of a wall covered in rose drawings, 12 of them, and a note written in a child's hand. Dear Miss Eliza, we don't know you, but your rose reached us. We are not free yet, but we're not alone anymore. The light carriers. Eliza's eyes welled up. She turned to the window. Snow was beginning to fall, soft, gentle, but her heart was burning. She called Thomas, now older, working for the Children's Protection Board. They need us, she said simply. He didn't ask who, he didn't ask where. He just said, when do we leave? In less than a week they arrived in Greystone, but not as rescuers, as listeners. As witnesses they met with local councils, showed the photos, read the letters aloud, and they asked the only question that ever truly mattered. What kind of world do we want our children to wake up in? Within a month, Greystone's facility was reformed, the iron locks replaced with open doors, the guards removed, the children given books, art, food, safety. Art, food, safety. A garden was planted in the center of the yard. In it, a rose bush. At the base was a stone plaque that read, for the girl who believed silence wasn't the end, and for the children who carried light where no one else would. Eliza didn't speak at the opening ceremony. She just stood among the children and let them talk. She listened to Isaac as he read a poem he wrote about the rose, his hands shaking. She hugged Noura after her short speech. She watched the small ones dip their fingers in paint and leave handprints along the courtyard walls. And in that moment, she realized something. She was no longer the fire. She was the spark. The light was theirs now. That night, as Eliza walked alone down the quiet garden path, she looked up at the sky. It was full of stars. She thought of her father, of her mother, of Thomas, of the children who didn't make it, and of the one thing they had all carried. Whether they knew it or not, hope, she whispered to the stars. They won't just remember my name. They'll remember what we gave them, the courage to bloom. Snow fell over Hollowfield again. But this time, it was not a symbol of silence. It was a celebration inside the greenhouse. Children sang quietly while string lights blinked across the glass. The rosebush, still the original one Eliza had watered, in chains now, had dozens of branches, thick and proud. They were red, pink, and white blooms. They called it the Freedom Rose. Eliza stood beside it with her hands folded gently. She was older now. Her body moved slower, her shoulders bent with age, but her spirit, it still glowed, like a lantern in a storm. But this wasn't just a winter festival, it was farewell, because the rose had grown too large for one soil. Its roots were already stretching across countries and now across oceans. A month earlier, a girl named Rosalinda wrote a letter. She lived in a place called Port Langley, a coastal town across the sea. Her school was not like Hollowfield. On the outside it looked new, clean, even painted with bright colors, but inside it was different. Children were locked in small rooms for crying. Food was taken as punishment. Speaking in native languages was called misbehavior. Rosalinda was 11. Her mother had taught her to speak 2 languages, one from her ancestors, one from the New World, but here her words were called broken. Wrong. One day, after a punishment, she found a paper folded between two library books on it. A drawing of a rose beneath it. Even in the dark, something beautiful can bloom. She held it to her chest like a prayer, and that night, she wrote a letter. To Eliza Tallow. The letter crossed oceans, and when it arrived, Eliza opened it slowly, her fingers shaking. She read every line, every scar, every silence between words, and then she stood up. She called Thomas, she called the board, she called Bramley, and within a week she was on a ship. When Eliza arrived at Port Langley, she was greeted not by guards or officials, but by children, a whole row of them, standing outside the gates. Holding paper roses, Rosalinda was at the front. She didn't speak at first. She just stepped forward and handed Eliza something. A small wooden box. Inside were scraps, a coin from her mother's country, a string from her father's jacket, a dried rose petal taped to the lid. "I made my hope box," she said softly. Eliza knelt and whispered, "It's the most beautiful one I've ever seen." What followed was unlike anything Eliza had seen before. Meetings, letters, news, coverage, resistance. The headmaster of Port Langley School was furious. He called it disruption, foreign noise, useless rebellion, but he couldn't stop it because the children had already started painting roses on the walls. They were sharing their food, helping each other speak the wrong languages during free time, and every night, in the courtyard, they sang quietly beneath the stars. Songs passed down by grandmothers, songs of fire and rain, songs no punishment could erase. One evening, after weeks of petitions and pressure, the gates of Port Langley were opened permanently. Children were allowed to keep their hope boxes. Teachers were trained to listen instead of punish, and in the middle of the yard, Rosalinda planted a rose bush from a cutting Eliza brought across the sea. It took root quickly, bloomed fast, and the petals were the deepest red anyone had ever seen. Before leaving, Eliza sat beside Rosalinda. "You'll lead this now," she said gently. "I'm not ready," Rosalinda whispered. Elisa smiled. "Neither was I." Back in Hollowfield, Elisa stood once more before the original rose. She placed her hand on its bark and leaned in close. "I saw it," she whispered. "The rose grew wings." And she wasn't wrong. Within months, letters came from places she had never visited. Letters from cities where children hid roses in their books. Letters from war zones, refugee camps, and broken schools. Each one carried the same drawing. Each one carried the same dream. And one day a child wrote simply, "The rose is not a plant anymore. It is a promise." There was no color left in the city. The buildings were broken. The streets were buried in dust. The sky itself looked tired, gray, and heavy with smoke. But beneath the rubble of a collapsed school, something strange moved. A hand, small, shaking it, belonged to a boy named Yusuf. He was 10 years old, and he had not spoken in days. Not since the last plane flew overhead. Not since the ground cracked open. Not since his mother stopped breathing beneath the bricks he pulled himself from the wreckage. His clothes were torn, his feet bare, ash covered his face. All he carried was a pouch on a string around his neck, and inside it something soft. Something sacred. A petal. Dried. Paper. Thin. Crimson red. A petal from a rose that had once grown in a camp far from here. Given to his mother by a woman who came with books and seeds and stories. His mother had said, "This rose means you belong, even when the world forgets." And now the world had forgotten, but Yusuf hadn't. He walked for days, through ruins past soldiers and silence. He drank from broken fountains, slept beside burnt walls. And one night, just when he thought he could walk no further, he saw something in the distance, a tent. Then two, then many. It was a refugee outpost. Someone gave him soup. Someone wrapped his feet in cloth, but no one asked his name. Not until he met Raya. She was 13, tall with sharp eyes. She helped run a makeshift school inside a shipping container. She had once lived in a country with schools, buses, and music, but not anymore. She saw the pouch around Yusuf's neck. "What's that?" she asked gently. He didn't speak. He just opened it and let the petal fall into his hand. Raya gasped, then smiled, and from her backpack she pulled something, a notebook on the cover, a rose drawn in charcoal. Under it, "We bloom in silence." That night, for the first time, Yusuf wrote his name. Raya helped him spell it. Then she gave him a pencil and told him a story about a girl named Eliza, about a cellar filled with flowers, about children who whispered in the dark, and one who shouted when the world finally listened. Weeks passed. Yusuf grew stronger. He began helping Raya teach the younger children. He handed out chalk, drew smiley faces, pointed at maps. And every time a new child arrived, scared and hungry, he offered them something. Not food, not water, but the petal. He let them hold it for a moment, just long enough to know, "You're not broken, you're blooming." Word spread. Someone painted a rose on the wall of the outpost. Then another. Then another. Volunteers arrived with books about Eliza, boxes filled with rose seeds. And one day Yusuf saw something that made him cry. Not from sadness, from AW. In the middle of the dust, a child had dug a hole, poured water, planted a seed, and a tiny green sprout had broken through the earth across the sea. At Hollowfield, Eliza sat with her cane resting beside her. She no longer traveled. Her legs couldn't handle the long journeys, but her voice was still strong, still clear. She opened a letter from a camp across the ocean. The words were shaky, but they held power. My name is Yusuf. I carry the petal, and now I carry others too. We bloom with no soil. We bloom with no sun. But still we bloom. Eliza held the letter to her heart and whispered, "You are the new roots." The hall was silent, not the kind of silence that comes with boredom, but the kind that wraps around the heart and waits. Rows of leaders sat in suits and scarves, badges pinned to their chests. Cameras were set in every corner. Behind the grate, the blue symbol of the United Nations, golden letters gleamed under soft light. Let every voice be heard. And today, they were going to hear a voice no one expected. A boy walked slowly to the stage, small, dark-eyed, wearing a wrinkled gray shirt and mismatched shoes in one hand. He held a letter in the other, a pouch, and inside it, the rose petal. Yusuf. Now, 12. Invited to speak not as a refugee, not as a survivor, but as a messenger of a movement that had crossed borders, outlived violence, and bloomed through ash and snow. He reached the microphone, froze for a second, then breathed and began. When I was little, my mother gave me something. It wasn't gold, it wasn't money, it was this. He lifted the pouch and gently placed the dried rose petal on the podium. She said it meant I belong. She said even in war, something beautiful can grow. I didn't believe her. Not until I found Rhea. Not until I found the others who carried their own petals, stories, names, and scars. He looked out at the crowd. Leaders leaned forward. Reporters froze mid-note. No one blinked. You don't know our names. You only call us by what we've lost. Homeless, refugee, orphan, displaced. But we are not what we lost. We are what we are. A tear slipped down someone's cheek in the third row. We carry hope in pockets. We carry songs and whispers. And we carry each other. He paused, then unfolded the letter. It was old, faded. This was written by Eliza Tallow, she said. One child's voice can turn a locked door into an open gate. That voice still lives, not just in me, but in every girl who plants seeds on broken land, in every boy who shares his food before he eats, in every child who dares to speak in a room like this. He closed the letter and then, with trembling hands, he placed the rose petal into a glass case beside the microphone. This is not a flower. It's proof. The room erupted. Applause, not the polite kind, the kind that shakes windows, the kind that brings people to their feet. A woman from Kenya stepped forward with tears in her eyes. She kissed the air beside Yusuf's cheek. A delegate from India offered to fund rose gardens in refugee centers. A journalist from France whispered to her cameraman, "This boy just rewrote the meaning of hope." That night, Yusuf walked along the river outside the UN building. Rhea walked beside him, her bag full of new letters from children around the world. They sat on a bench, looked up at the city lights, and said nothing for a long time. Then Rhea broke the silence. "You changed them." Yusuf shook his head. "They just remembered who they are." The next morning, a letter was delivered to Hollowfield. Elisa, now very old, opened it slowly. Inside, a photo of Yusuf standing at the United Nations, his fingers resting on the petal. On the back, written in black ink, *, "We spoke, they listened. The rose is now everywhere." *. Eliza smiled. She closed her eyes. And whispered, "The silence is over."